What happens in the woods stays in the woods. You wish. Instead, the things in the woods follow you home, driven by the scent of your flesh, ready to feast the next time you exit your house. Spooked yet? Today we're going to take a look at 10 real-life monsters seen in the woods. Don't worry, you're safe for now. If you want your story in a future video, send it over at darknessprevails.org/submit. Thank you. It Wasn't Human by John. This story takes place about a month ago in a very rural region of Pennsylvania. The night this took place, me and my friend Zach were working on my car in our shop pretty late. Our shop is a medium-sized building in the middle of the woods, just outside of a small city. The car needed a few new parts to run properly, and we didn't realize how late it was getting. Things began to get weird around 1 in the morning. We had the radio on, so it wasn't like we could hear everything plain as day. Out of nowhere, Zach mentioned to me that he was hearing noises that he didn't think were coming from the radio. So I turned the radio off, and to our surprise, there was a certain noise that continued on. It was coming from the roof. It sounded like a scratching or tapping sound. The closest I can describe it is the sound of a dog's nails walking on a hard floor. It was all over the roof too, as if it were running in circles. It was fast, like almost impossibly fast. We were convinced at first that it was multiple animals up there. Curious, Zach decided to grab the ladder and climbed into the attic to get a closer listen. That was a bad idea. He gets near the top, and before he even had a chance to say anything, whatever was on the roof started making a very strange noise. It almost sounded like a person gasping for air, like a deep vocal inhale, but without struggle. It was very smooth and clean sounding, but that made it all even creepier. Zach fell halfway down the ladder because it startled him so badly. As I was checking to make sure he was alright, the thing on the roof jumped off, which is even more strange because the roof is about 15 feet off the ground, which would have injured any person. When it hit the ground, it sounded very hollow, like a deep thud. Then, it bounded off almost immediately, very, very quickly. It was gone before I could even get to the window right behind me to see it. Zach and I took a few moments to recollect and wonder what on earth just happened. After about half an hour of no events, we were brave enough to start working on the car again. Not too much happened, so we were able to get the car finished. By then, it was 3 a.m. Both of our hearts sank to the floor, though, when we began to hear the same extremely fast footsteps in the distance, now coming back toward the shop. It was now right outside the garage door at that point. I went over to the window and tried to look out. The thing was so close to the door, I could not even get a look at it through the window. All I could see was its shadow. Whatever it was on the ground on all fours. It was extremely skinny, and it was still very tall. On all fours, it was above my waist, and I'm 6'3". The thing was literally just standing at the front of the door for a long time, almost as if it knew that we had to come back out sometime. The worst part was, the shop had no phone, and there was no cell phone coverage out here in the boonies. We were practically stuck. Then, to our horror, the thing came right over to the window and stood up on its back legs. It was now standing like a human right over the window. It was taller than I expected, 8 feet or so, and its skin was a pale sulfur color. The eyes reflected yellow, and they were staring us down straight into our soul. Its hands were the creepiest part, because each hand had about 7 fingers, and each finger was about a foot long. Zach and I were literally petrified. We were having a staring contest with this thing. I'd never seen anything like it. It did eventually go away from the window and back over to the garage door. The only way out we had was with the car we were just working on. We got it in and started it, opened the door, and began to pull out. Luckily, the creature was gone now, whatever it was. We were not taking any chances, though. We closed the door with the remote and bolted out of there. Zach and I did not bring it up after that day, both of us silently knowing it makes us feel crazy and horrified every time we think about it. And ever since, we haven't stayed past nightfall in the shop, for obvious reasons. I never used to believe in anything paranormal, strange animals and whatnot, but these days, I truly do believe there are things on this planet that no one knows about, or they simply don't want to think about, and they are terrifying. Dog Soldier in the Midwest by Roy M. I've lived in this small South Dakota town my whole life. I'm 26 years old, and I'm a bit on the heavier side for only being 5'11". I've hunted and fished all my life, and I've seen most of every animal on this North American continent, thanks to my time spent in Bear Country, USA, and of course to some local zoos. Now I've always loved horror films, especially ones with creatures, like the Wolfman and Alien. Werewolves in particular have always been terrifying to me, especially how movies have always portrayed them. When watching movies about werewolves, it's hard not to wonder what it would be like to see one. I never had any idea the scale of how creepy and horrifying a real-life example of one could be. It happened this last June of 2018. I was coming home from work in south-central South Dakota, and I was tired from working a long day in the hayfield. As I came home like I have thousands of times, it was a nice cool dark night. As I made my way to my house in the forest, I was soon greeted with barking by my 10-month-old German Shepherd puppy that was on the cable in the front yard. I walked up to him, pet him, and noticed his automatic water needed filled back up, and his food was nearly gone. I took him off the leash so he could run around the yard and chase rabbits, which was apparently his favorite thing. After a few minutes of him running around, he came back up to me, wanting more attention. I happily obliged. He was a well-mannered dog after all. I put him back on his cable as I was ready to go back inside and call it a night. I stood on my deck to have a final smoke before bed. As I took in the nice cool breeze, I looked at my phone to see what the world of Facebook had to offer that night. All of a sudden, the pup started barking like crazy and did this short mumble kind of bark. It was odd because it was way more aggressive than his usual tone. I walked over to him, wanting to see what he was barking at. When I got to him, he was looking down the gravel road surrounded by trees that leads eventually toward Main Street. I looked in the general direction of where I thought he was looking, but I couldn't make anything out. I was left scratching my head, wondering why he was getting all worked up like that. As I looked again, I noticed further down the road, there was something swaying slowly back and forth by a big cedar tree. I strained my eyes to get a better look at it, and that's when the creature moved a little too far into the light. What I saw, I now know was a dog man, all too similar to the creatures from the film Dog Soldiers. It was 7 feet tall, and it had short silver or almost dirty white hair. It didn't have very large ears or a mane like the things in the film. It looked more like a pointer or lab. As I watched in horror, I noticed it never took its devilish red eyes off of my pup. I do not know if it saw me, or if it just wasn't interested. It simply stood there, watching my German Shepherd. I've heard stories that most of these creatures have a style or shape of the shepherd head, but this was more like a deformed wolf, if that makes sense. After a very anxiety-filled few seconds, I saw the thing's head snap towards me, and we locked eyes. It bared nasty yellow fangs. The creature stared and slowly slinked back into the shadows where it came from, then turned and just walked away. I guess it wasn't interested anymore. I quickly reached down and I unclipped my dog from his cable, making sure I had a good hold of his collar so he wouldn't try and chase the creature into the woods like he likes to do to the rabbits. He would probably get himself hurt, or worse. I brought him inside with me for protection for the both of us. This was my first encounter with anything out of the ordinary, and I sincerely pray that it's the last, because the mere sight of that thing has given me nightmares. Be careful in the dark, and always pay attention if something is off, because if I hadn't, I don't think my pup would be around. Thing in the Woods by Munch82. I'm a teenage girl from a small military community in Canada. Nothing bad ever happens here, which makes what I'm about to tell you all the more terrifying. This happened to me, my best friend, and my best friend's brother about 5 years ago. I had just turned 12, and I was staying the night at my best friend Nate's house. About a block away from his house, there was a small bit of forest. So Nate's older brother Logan suggested that we should all go exploring there. Being the adventurous kids we were, Nate and I happily agreed. So later that day, we all walk up there. The place is called Hermit's Hill. We arrived and explored for a bit, but the whole time I had this odd sensation, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. That kind of feeling you get after watching a really good horror flick. Now, I've always been a cautious person. Nate and Logan knew this, so when I told them how I felt, they simply dismissed it as me being paranoid. We had been there for nearly an hour now. The three of us are just sitting on the bank of the creek that ran through the forest. The boys were just talking, but I was freaking out because the feeling from earlier was now getting amped up to 11, and I had no idea why. Then Logan began to whistle, which was nothing out of the ordinary. But from somewhere in the forest, we heard someone else whistle the exact same tune as Logan. We all froze and looked in the direction it came from. Logan then went to whistle again, and it happened once more, someone replying to his whistle. Then to the right of us, we heard a low voice coming from the bushes. It simply said, "Hey, hey." There was a figure there, something or someone hunched down, with an odd-looking crook in its back. It did not look like a person. With that, we all took off running with the goal to leave the forest. I've never run so fast in my life. We could hear something yelling at us, whistling the same tune again, over and over, in between shouts of, "Hey, hey." At one point, I thought I could hear footsteps behind us, all too rapid footsteps that sounded more like an insect than a person. All I could think was it was going to end out here. I quickly glanced behind us to see if we were being followed, but when I turned back, I ran headfirst into a branch. I temporarily blacked out, and when I woke up, I was in a ton of pain. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged out of the forest by Nate and Logan, at which point I passed out again due to the combination of pain and fear. When I woke up once more, Nate was standing over me, asking me if I was okay. I sat up and looked around with my good eye. We were out of the forest now, and at the end where the creek started. After that, we went back to Nate's place, and his mother tended to my eye. It's been years since then. Nate and I are 16 now, and Logan is 18. We still often talk about what happened out there in the forest. We speculate on who or what it may have been, but we don't dare go back to Hermit's Hill. Road Trip Creature by Huntsy. This is a short story, but will probably make you as curious as it made me. I was on a trip to a friend's house one day. It was just after sundown, so the only remaining lights were the street lights passing above us and my headlights. I live in farm country, so you can go quite some time without seeing anybody, which makes for quite relaxing drives, especially with the trees and wilderness all around the roads. I was passing through an intersection when I saw, about half a mile down the road, 2 glowing orbs. They were too dim to be headlights, but too big to be of a normal animal. The closer I got, the more I could see, and the more I wished I turned away at that intersection. My headlights soon revealed a 7-foot gray humanoid with massive orange eyes. It appeared to have just exited the forest just off the road. I slowed down as I neared the creature, praying that it would get out of the way. I got within 20 yards when, without hesitation, it bolted with ridiculous speed off of the road. It jumped a good 5 feet over a cattle fence and into the trees lining the nearby hayfield, all without losing eye contact with me. Honestly, I nearly soiled myself. Luckily, I made it to my friend's place without any more experiences. I haven't seen it since, and I hope I never will. Terror on the Road by Deborah S. I live in the UK, Leeds to be precise, which is in West Yorkshire. In the area this took place, we have the odd small patch of woodland here and there, but nothing like the vast areas they have in the USA. This is why my story is so unsettling, and still creeps me out to this day. It was 1993, on one autumn evening. My husband and I visited an old workmate of his and his wife at the other side of York. It was a really small village, 1 pub and that was it. I was the designated driver, so I was drinking Coke all night. We left their house around 12:45 a.m. On the A64, the route home, there were large thick patches of fog, which appeared then disappeared all along the dual carriageway. I hate driving in the fog, so I was ultra alert. There were very few cars on the road, which didn't strike me as odd, given the time. I was wide awake and concentrating. Hubby was drunk and asleep in the passenger seat. Soon we were approaching Leeds, and I drove on the outer ring road towards Farsley, where we then lived. I was on the A6120, approaching Horsforth roundabout, when I had a sudden, overwhelming feeling of absolute and utter terror. It seemingly came from nowhere. I was completely terrified, for no reason. The hackles went up on the back of my neck as I made my way down the hill into a dip, before I climb up to the next roundabout. On the right-hand side, there is a thickish wooded area, a wide grass verge, and a private shooting range, again surrounded by trees. It was now approaching 1:25 a.m. The terror I felt increased as I came toward the dip over the bridge, which passed over the Leeds-Skipton railway line, the River Aire, and the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, all running parallel to each other. As I made it to the bottom of the dip, where there is a bus stop with a small pull-in area, I was in full panic mode, and then I saw, standing just a bit away from the bus stop on the path, a massive shape in the wooded area. I knew that if I looked at the thing directly, something bad would happen. The silhouette never moved as I drew level with it. I could see it out of the corner of my eye. I was so petrified by its presence, I floored the accelerator to get away from it. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, it stepped off the curb and into the lane I had just driven by in. It must have been at the very least 7 feet tall, covered in dark, thick, shaggy hair or fur, and at least 4 feet wide. There were no discernible limbs and no features I could see from that distance. But I knew those eyes were boring into the car. I could have been sick on the spot, and by the time we get home I was shaking so much I could not get the key in our door. As a side note, a few years later, I decided to put an article in our local paper, asking if anyone had experienced any paranormal activity in Leeds, as I wanted to write a book. I had loads of letters, mainly regarding UFOs, which I was interested in, having seen one close up years before, but I didn't want the book to be about those. A certain young man, who wouldn't give me his name, sent me a letter that made me break out in goosebumps as I read it. He said that a while after my experience, he was working at a local supermarket near us on the twilight shift. He left work at 2 a.m. and cycled past the end of our road to make his way home. As he approached the church and shops, he could see 2 of the same things I had previously described, and they were crouching in the road. He stopped his bike and waited. He said they made no noise and appeared as if they hadn't seen him. They then both stood up, looked right at him, and silently walked behind a row of shops, disappearing. After seeing that, he altered his route home as he was absolutely terrified by those creatures. He said he thought he was going mad until he had read my story. Apparently, there have been a few reports over the years about bizarre things in this area, but I didn't know this until years after my incident. I very rarely drive on this road at night now because I want to stay alive. Wendigo in Ohio by FrenchFryyt. When I lived in Ohio several years ago, when I was around the age of 6 or 7, I was in the Cub Scouts. Around midwinter in January of 2012, I believe I saw a Wendigo. We went on a campout, as that's what Cub Scouts do. The first thing that happened was on a Friday night. I had to stay until Sunday morning. We all had already eaten and played a game of Monopoly. We were getting ready to make s'mores, but we all suddenly felt the feeling of being watched. We had been seeing deer all day in those woods, so we didn't think much of it. But what got us unnerved were the few panicked and frightened deer who ran right through our campsite once every few minutes. Around 11 p.m., we started to hear twigs snapping. This was normal because for the past 2 hours we had been listening to them. The issue was that these were louder and they lingered around our campsite, as if whatever it was waiting for something. We all got inside our tents thinking nothing of it, ready to head off to sleep for the night. But I knew deep down that something wasn't right. There was a strange smell in the air, coming from the location as the branches were breaking. You could tell by the power of the odor which way the smell was coming from. The following day, we saw tons of large coyote footprints, and we assumed that the smell and the noise was them carrying around fresh prey. The issue was, though, that the footprints were as big as my brother's hand. We soon called the camp owner, and he told us there had been sightings of a strange animal, and he wasn't sure he believed it, something that apparently had deer-like antlers. Obviously, he admitted to how far-fetched it was, and he doubled down on the belief that it wasn't real. Late Saturday night, though, since the parents were getting creeped out, they decided to send us all to the bathroom in groups to make sure we were safe. There was only one toilet, though. We went in groups of 4 and there were 12 of us. And that's when we saw it. A large, decaying-looking thing, crouched down on all 4s. It started when someone in our group pointed and said, "What is that?" And when we turned, the creature rose up, about twice the height of me when I was 7. It screeched at us, and my dad bolted to his tent to grab something. There was a bright flash of light and a bang. But the thing didn't even flinch. It kept screeching. This was when I could see it more clearly. Its fur looked like it was rotting off of its body, and the legs looked like dog legs, which would explain the coyote-like prints in the ground around the campsite. It was way too thin to be healthy. Before I could scan the rest of it, it had bolted off into the woods, and we immediately drove home after our parents were not able to calm us down. I wasn't able to get myself back in the woods until 6th grade, and I quit after that because of hearing footsteps outside our campsite that were too heavy to be human. I personally do not ever want to go camping again. The Monster of Waldo County, Maine, by Clifton. It was 4 months ago. I was 16. I was going out with a friend of mine named Roger. We met under tragic conditions as both our fathers had passed away. We were going out in the woods for a night to do our usual nighttime activities. It's nice just being out there, but from time to time you see the occasional wounded animal who needs help. And one time we even found someone who was lost and helped them find their way back to the road. We had our flashlights on us that night. It was around 11:43 p.m., and we were on separate paths. But we had walkie-talkies to communicate. About half an hour goes by, and I'm still just walking around. Then, when I had to use the bathroom, someone grabbed my left shoulder. I nearly screamed until I saw it was Roger, but he's talking in a whisper. "Cliff, there's someone or something 50 yards away, over there." I followed him. We began hiding in a spot where whatever it was couldn't see us. We were at our quietest, and I was getting really creeped out. He shushed me and began to beckon me to look over where we were hiding so that I could get a glimpse of what he was talking about. I did see it. Something like a black silhouette. So black that the darkness and night around it was somehow less dark. The black was coming off of it in long, raggy, hair-like shapes. I gasped. I didn't mean to, it just happened, but I did it. And as soon as it heard it, we saw the most unnatural red eyes piercing through our hiding spot, looking straight at us. We ran the full few miles right out of the woods, only stopping when we broke the tree line, and at that point, we both collapsed and nearly passed out from exhaustion. It was only then that we heard it, a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. It made my ears ring for hours after. We were safe now, only barely escaping the strange, dark thing. Unknown Creature by WolfBoy. It was a Saturday evening when I was 10. I happened to hear it before seeing it. It happened close to a flea market in the lower Rio Grande Valley. There was and still is a long fence toward the back of the flea market parking lot, and on the other side of the fence is a small dense piece of dry grassland with a lot of mesquite trees all around and a few acorn-like trees. I was always fascinated by that small piece of wilderness, since I'm used to seeing more stones and grapefruit trees. The fence used to be bent over down, but now it's not and has been repaired. I was playing with my best friend's little brother and a friend of theirs when, in the distance, I heard what I can only describe as a bizarre screech, an alarming amalgamation of a woman's scream and an animal's growl. I froze up, then quickly asked my friends if they had heard it. Oddly enough, only one of them said yes. While I was trying to rack my head as to what it was, the brother tugged at my shirt and I looked at him. He was staring horrified toward the fence. We all looked in that direction. At first, I thought he was just playing a prank, but then he asked, "Did you guys see that?" Before I could reply, I began to notice that there was something at the fence only very well camouflaged. Something just barely moving. Then, with a snarl, it quickly pulled itself back behind the trees and tall grass, where we could no longer see it. Moments after it disappeared, the screech came again, not as loud as before, but enough of a warning to tell us to get away. What I saw I'm not sure of, but I do know that humans don't move like that, and they don't blend in with their environment like some sort of wild animal. Wendigo in Maine by Igneous D. Ever since I was 10, I've been an avid outdoorsman, and I've been hunting in the woods of Maine with my grandfather. In January of 2016, I picked up a Mossy Nugget 9130 at a gun show. This was the standard service rifle of the Red Army, during WW1. I've always been a history nut, and this was my chance to combine my love of hunting with my love of history. I cleaned it up and got it sighted in and ready for November. One day that November, my grandfather gave me a call and said, "Meet me at our usual spot, and we'll head in for half a day's hunt." I was ecstatic. My first available day out in the woods and a chance to drag out my new rifle. Snow had fallen the previous night and was forecast for that day. As I pulled my Jeep up to the edge of the woods, I put it in park and got out to meet my grandfather. "I've got a good feeling about today," he said to me as we got loaded up. "We're gonna see something," he said. And for once, I wish he had been wrong. The day started off slow enough, and by noon we had seen several deer, but neither of us had a chance for a clear shot. We discussed sticking with our half-day hunting plan, but decided that due to the sightings we would stay the rest of the day. We split up, and I headed deeper into the property. Another hour passes, and it begins to snow. I set my rifle aside as I reposition under the trees. As I get situated, I noticed how absolutely silent the woods had become. Anyone familiar with the outdoors knows that they are never truly silent. There's always birds, squirrels, animals, and insects alike. But this time, it was really nothing. I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach and checked to make sure my rifle was still loaded and began to scan the trees nearby. And that's when I heard it, the terrible scream off in the distance. I called my grandfather on my phone. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" he responded. But he continued before I could respond to that. "Just saw 2 deer run by like something spooked them." After a moment we hung up, and that's when I saw something. A tall, pale, white, emaciated thing in the woods, about 150 feet away from me, downhill. It had silently appeared out of nowhere, and it appeared to be eating something small like a squirrel, streaks of red covering its front and the snow around it. I raised my rifle, taking aim on this thing, and tried to keep it steady. As I adjusted to a kneeling position, my rifle, which was almost 50 inches long, got caught in the low-hanging branches, causing one to crack. The creature turned completely to face me, cocking its head to the side in curiosity. As it took a step towards me, I fired. it screamed again, the same noise I'd heard earlier in the day, and went crashing back toward the swamp, quickly vanishing into the woods and now heavily falling snow. I quickly cycled the bolt, loading another round, and called my grandfather to tell him I was leaving for the day. He said he was leaving too, and insisted that I wait for him at the spot we met for lunch. I was horrified at the thought of having to stay in the woods for another second, but I waited and soon met up with him. As we walked out, I noticed the sound in the woods had returned, and that put me at ease a bit. I never told him about what I saw, and I still hunt those woods to this day. I've never really seen any sign of that thing again, but I always make sure I'm out of the woods well before sundown. Wolf in the Woods by Ilias. It happened a few weeks ago when I was visiting my grandma. She lives near the moorland, so I go walking there a lot. It happened when I was taking one of my many nightly strolls through the moor. While I was walking, I started to notice that something was off. I don't know why I felt like that, but I'm thankful that I did. Usually there was more noise out here, but that night it was too quiet. I told myself to suck up the silence and just keep walking. After 20 minutes of walking, I stopped again. I don't know why, but I just couldn't move. Suddenly I heard a noise. It was so abrupt considering the silence that had perturbed the air for so long. I turned around and stared right into the bright green eyes of something not of this world. It appeared as a half-wolf, half-man creature, and the weirdest part was that when I saw it, I felt calm. I stared into its oddly beautiful eyes. 3 more creatures like it emerged from the darkness behind it. I stepped back, in awe of them, still feeling calm instead of frightened. After a couple of minutes, the one with the green eyes stood up on 2 legs. Much of its hair began to sink back into its skin, leaving behind pale human-colored skin. I stared at the bristling and waving hairs emerging and unemerging from the thing for a few seconds. It seemed to be beckoning me to follow it, and seemingly just in time, I regained enough composure to say something. "Non," I said, which means no. The expression on the creature changed, and I swear it gave me a nod. All of the beasts turned the other way and disappeared into the darkness. I fell to my knees, feeling like I had just walked several miles. Now the horror was filling my body, and the adrenaline I should have felt was pumping through me. What did I just see? I wondered. Even still, I think to myself, what would have happened to me if I would have went with those wolf-like creatures? It's awe-inspiring to know that the woods can be such a strange and mystical place, even in modern times. But with that mystery and intrigue, you should also show the wilderness some respect. People pass and disappear in those woods all the time, taking nature for granted. But if you play your cards right, you'll be able to leave the woods after a nice long hike or camping trip, never having been eaten by something you thought was only a legend. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the videos. Don't forget, you can send me your stories at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for backpacker stories and sea monster sightings. If you want to support my channel further, you can go to patreon.com/darknessprevails and donate any amount. That'll let you download all future videos, and it'll get your name in the credits at the end of these videos. If you got a little bit of extra cash, click the shop button below this video, or go to teespring.com/darkprevails and get some creepy cool Darkness Prevails merchandise. Thank you. Now then, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 backwoods horror stories. Ambit Gambino says, "Hey daddy, give me your seed. Wanna get freaky?" Man, I just don't have a green thumb. Nothing happens when I plant my seeds, my friend. I had a lavender plant not too long ago and it died pretty fast. So yeah, I wouldn't get freaky with this guy. Hussein Reesby says, "Best as always, Datey, but more Skinwalkers would be tasty. Love you from India." It's good to hear from you, Hussein. I love hearing from my peeps all around the globe. Yeah, more Skinwalkers are definitely coming up soon. That's one topic I can't stay away from. Lil HB says, "I was just thinking about watching him until I got the notification. By the way, if you see this, can you do more Werewolf and Dogman videos?" Oh, you'll love this video then. Plenty of werewolfy stuff going on here. Thunder Shadow says, "No more fear facts?" Sadly, all the side projects I thought I had time for, I just don't anymore. And anything I want to do YouTube related, I'm torn about. There's original content I want to make, sure, but I don't want to depend on YouTube anymore. That's why instead of other types of videos and things like that, I'm working on some video games that hopefully you guys will like and bring in some stable revenue. I hope you understand. And BPS CPS Rap says, "So is this about going in the woods or smoking blunts? Why not both?" Anyways guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails video. More scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are my Patrons who continue to support me and make these videos possible. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.